What's going on, guys? Welcome to the circus, and it's good to talk to y'all. It's been a little while since I've been on the mic. I've had a lot going on in my life personally, and I'm sure that all of you have had a lot going on in your lives as well. Watching this Omicron variant nonsense spread like wildfire throughout the country has been really quite the bizarre experience. Now, we've all gone through the first one together and the second one and the third one, and you would think we would be used to it by now, but I have been truly and utterly shocked by the reaction that I've seen from the people around me to this new variant. It's so bizarre. It's like after Delta kind of started waning and you would talk to the people that you knew, the people who took the jab and people who were buying into it, and generally the narrative had started to shift. A lot of people were admitting like, oh, it was a lot of peer pressure and coercion. I wanted to keep my job and I kind of regret taking the jab, and this whole thing is kind of crazy. And then Omicron came around and it's like, hey, they didn't have to do lockdowns this time in the United States of America. They just basically put it out that we should lock down, and that was good enough. In Pennsylvania, everything's closed down right now. You can't even find anywhere to go for New Year's Eve because all the bars and all the event places are closed. They're closed on their own. Nobody told them to close. Nobody forced them to close. They just did. It's quite bizarre. I was wondering, like, what am I going to do for my first video back? And then over the past couple of days, it's become quite obvious. I'm going to rehash some things that we had already been talking about for literally years. We're going to start off with Anthony Fauci because, it's hard for me to show you examples of the previous videos I have made about this guy and the lies that he told around EcoHealth Alliance and the funding out of the Wuhan lab because they've all been removed. There were videos I got strikes for and was banned off YouTube for 2 weeks at a time, like upwards of 10 times. My subscribers who have been here for a while, you guys know, we were talking about Anthony Fauci outright lying to Congress for a long time because of Peter Daszak and EcoHealth Alliance. And now that Newsweek has put out this article about this, it's actually, free game for us to talk about it again. So we'll talk about it in the context of we already knew about this, but hey, look what the media is talking about. And that's what we're going to do with a couple of topics today. Newsweek comes out with a article, and if you haven't noticed, Newsweek and Time, they're these mainstream media or left-stream media news publications that they use to put out the truth whenever they want to drip all the way to a soft disclosure. They did it over the election, which I'm not allowed to talk about either, but, they came out and said, basically Mark Zuckerberg funded the stealing of the 2020 election, and they basically laid the whole thing out in Time. Newsweek's doing the same thing with Dr. Fauci, and what's the title of this article? How Dr. Fauci and other officials withheld information on China's coronavirus experiments. Well, isn't that a dandy? Everybody who was hating on Rand Paul all that time, turns out Rand Paul was telling the truth. Rand Paul got his information from, throw the bunny ears up, conspiracy theorists who were way ahead of him. But even when Rand Paul brought the questions to Dr. Fauci, he was labeled a nut job. And here it turns out, oh wait, he was telling the truth. Anthony Fauci lied. And that actually kind of kicked off something that I remember now. One of the episodes that I made that got removed by YouTube was entitled Anthony Fauci Lied and People Died. In hindsight, I think probably that was a little bit too strong of a title, and I can understand why they went ahead and pulled that. They are scared to death of the truth, and if you don't kind of disguise it in a way that's like a soft blow for them, they get really offended by it. I've literally had people tell me, just because you're telling the truth doesn't mean that you can just outright say it and expect people to accept it. You need to be able to massage the truth into people. Just saying, hey, but this is the reality of things. It's not good enough. You need to be nice and gentle to these people, warm them up to it. And of course, this article starts out with the famous quote, "The NIH has not ever and does not now fund gain-of-function research in the Wuhan Institute of Virology." But this Newsweek article talks about a tranche of documents that were released that they say, quote, complicates Dr. Fauci's denial. And what they say is these documents reveal that he was funding research in Wuhan that, quote, involved manipulating coronavirus in ways that could have made them more transmissible and deadly to humans, which is literally the definition of gain of function research. It's hilarious that they do this. It's really quite bizarre. But you want to talk about a semantic argument? Like, this is just outright semantics. It's like, I wasn't funding gain of function research. I was funding research that involved manipulating coronaviruses in ways that could have made them more transmissible and deadly to humans. Okay. The documents established that top NIH officials were concerned that the work may have crossed the line the U.S. government had drawn against funding such risky research. The funding came from NIH, which Dr. Fauci heads as the highest paid bureaucrat in the American bureaucracy. Newsweek actually calls their resistance to telling the truth here a Watergate-era cover-up. They really are dripping out that soft disclosure. It's pretty amazing. There's no evidence that the experiments in question had any direct bearing on the pandemic. Now, isn't that an interesting statement? Because if you have all the evidence that they can't get rid of, and they're outright lying about that, is it possible that the evidence that showed there was a direct connection has been destroyed and or omitted? It's quite possible. It's one of those things. What did George Bush say? Fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice, shame on me.
There's an old saying in Tennessee, I know it's in Texas, probably in Tennessee, that says, fool me once, shame on you. If fool me, we can't get fooled again.
He got so much wrong. Dr. Fauci made a strong argument that while this type of research was risky, it was necessary to prevent future pandemics. See, the problem with that statement is that when Rand Paul was talking to him, and after CV had been released into the population, it wasn't for Dr. Fauci to be having this argument. See, that was the argument that he made whenever the U.S. outlawed gain-of-function research, and he lost that argument. So now that he continued on with the research in China, he's trying to make that argument again. However, that argument has already been nullified, right? They already banned gain-of-function research. So after you've been caught doing it, after it was banned, you can't make the argument in favor of doing the research again. It doesn't matter. It's already been made illegal, right? The NIH dragged its feet over the FOIA requests on the matter, handing over documents only after The Intercept took the agency to court. Well, what a shock. And of course, it's outright illegal for the government to withhold FOIA requests because they are trying to save face and or prevent legal trouble. Except that's exactly what they've been doing. That's exactly what the bureaucracy does every single time. The apparent eagerness to conceal the documents has only raised suspicions about the controversial research and put the NIH on the defensive. Fauci told ABC, "Neither I nor Dr. Francis Collins, the director of NIH, lied or misled about what we've done. The episode is a self-inflicted wound that has further eroded trust in the nation's public health officials at a time when trust is most important." I would say something more along the lines of it's further eroded the nation's trust in bureaucrats that the nation already didn't trust at all. Then the article attempts to pivot from Fauci onto Peter Daszak, which we've all read the emails. Well, my videos have since been removed, but we went through the emails between Dr. Fauci and Daszak, and yes, they were both eagerly talking to each other about how on God's green earth they can cover up the fact that they were doing gain-of-function research in Wuhan, how on earth they could possibly steer the information away from the idea that they were doing that, but it was a two-way email exchange, right? Well, the article wants to talk about Daszak. That's fine. Let's go on down that line. The activities of Daszak and EcoHealth before the pandemic and during it show a startling lack of transparency about their work with coronaviruses and raise questions about what more there may be to learn. Really? Does it really? I'm pretty sure we were saying that back in 2019, early 2020, but okay. From the start, Daszak has worked vigorously to discredit any notion that the pandemic could have been the result of a lab accident. When the media was first grappling with the basics of the situation, and a lot of people on YouTube already had it down pat, Daszak organized a letter in the prestigious medical journal The Lancet from 27 scientists to strongly condemn conspiracy theories suggesting that the CV does not have a natural origin. And that's not the only false paper that The Lancet promoted either. I remember one they had to retract about a certain drug. Right. What he didn't reveal at the time was that the WIV had been using the NIH grant money to genetically engineer dozens of novel CV viruses discovered in bat samples, and that he knew it was entirely possible that one of those samples contained SARS-CoV-2 and had infected a researcher, as he conceded to the Journal of Science in November 17 interview, quote, "Of course it's possible things have happened in the past." The NIH fought more than a year to keep the details of the EcoHealth Alliance grant under wraps. The 528 pages of proposals, conditions, emails, and progress reports revealed that EcoHealth had funded experiments at the WIV that were considerably riskier than the ones previously disclosed. So after they stalled and stonewalled about the FOIA request, when they inevitably did release it, they did what they always do very predictably, and they released it all in this giant, massive release of bullcrap. And they're going to make you go through it line by line by line, hoping that you never find the pertinent information. They're just not understanding exactly how motivated we are to understand this situation. We're habitually underestimated. That's the one benefit to being a, quote, conspiracy theorist. The downside is you never get credit whenever you called something, but the upside is you're habitually underestimated. You guys are my viewers. You know exactly what I'm talking about. Y'all are in the same boat as me. Then the article goes into what we already know about May 2016 when EcoHealth was talking about making chimeras out of SARS-like viruses so that they could reproduce the spike protein and make it more effective at infecting humanized mice. This is the experiment that we went over back at the end of 2019. Newsweek says both experiments seem to cross the gain-of-function line, and the NIH officers said as much, sending Daszak a letter asking him to explain why he thought they didn't. In his reply, Daszak argued that because the new spikes being added to the chimeras were more distantly related to SARS and MERS than their original spikes, he didn't anticipate any enhanced pathogenicity or infectiousness. That was a key distinction that arguably made them exempt from the NIH's prohibition on gain-of-function experiments. So even though they were doing experiments that had 100% had a possibility of making it more infectious, he didn't believe it would. He thought it probably wouldn't, and so it's 100% legal, right? Because when the federal government puts a bar on conducting a certain type of research, it is always up to one bureaucrat to decide whether or not they feel like their research applies to that law, right? Makes total sense. But Daszak says, hey, listen, if it does create enhanced pathogenicity and if it does create enhanced infectiousness, I will let you know and I'll immediately stop the experiment. I'll tell you what, I'll tell you about it and we'll see what to do from there. The article says the NIH accepted Daszak's terms, inserting his suggestions into the grant conditions. Scientists at the Wuhan Institute of Virology conducted the experiments in 2018. To their surprise, the SARS-like chimeras quickly grew 10,000 times better than the natural virus, flourishing in the lab's humanized mice and making them sicker than the original. They had the hallmarks of very dangerous pathogens. The Wuhan Institute of Virology and EcoHealth did not stop the experiment as required, nor did they let the NIH know what was going on. The results were buried in Figure 35 of EcoHealth's Year 4 Progress Report delivered on April 2018. Now we start to understand why they've been hiding this so vigorously. They didn't even follow the rules they laid out for themselves. Peter Daszak and Anthony Fauci agreed that if they had made the virus more infectious, they would report it to the NIH and immediately stop. They made it 10,000 times more infectious, and they told no one. Did the NIH call Peter Daszak to explain himself? Of course not. There are no signs in the related documents that the NIH even noticed the alarming results. In fact, the NIH signals its enthusiasm for the project by granting EcoHealth $7.5 million 5-year renewal in 2019. In a letter to Congress, the NIH principal director acknowledged the screw-up. The screw-up. It's a screw-up now. Whoops. Whoops, we accidentally made SARS viruses that are 10,000 times more infectious and intentionally lied about it and didn't report it to anybody. And whoops, here comes this new SARS virus, but it's a screw up. It's a screw up, guys. A screw up. In a follow-up interview with the Washington Post, NIH Director Francis Collins was more blunt. They messed up here. There's going to be some consequences for EcoHealth. So far, the NIH has not elaborated on what those consequences might be. There needs to be consequences for EcoHealth, Peter Daszak, the NIH, and Anthony Fauci. There needs to be consequences for all of the people involved in this. They intentionally misled the public. They intentionally misled other arms of the government. They took taxpayer money, used it to create an enhanced chimeric SARS virus, and then covered it up when the shit hit the fan. As damning as the NIH grant documents are, they pale in comparison to another EcoHealth grant proposal leaked to the online investigative group Drastic in September. And I made a video on Drastic and the documents that they released back when this happened. That video has also since been removed because I was talking about things that were crazy conspiracy theories. But hey, here it is in Newsweek, so let's go. In that 2018 proposal to the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, otherwise known as DARPA, EcoHealth sketched an elaborate plan to discover what it would take to turn a garden variety coronavirus into a pandemic pathogen. Now, think about that. At the same time that EcoHealth was putting forward this proposal to DARPA, Bill Gates and the rest of the yahoos were getting ready to run a simulation worldwide pandemic based on what? That's right, a coronavirus that turned into a pandemic pathogen. Isn't that interesting? They proposed widely sampling Chinese bats in search of a new SARS-related virus, grafting the spike protein from those viruses onto other viruses they had in the lab to create a suit of chimeras. Then, through genetic engineering, introducing mutations into those chimeras and testing them in humanized mice. You guys... Again, we went over this already when the original documents were leaked, but now we're talking about it in Newsweek. It's the drip, drip, drip with soft disclosure, and this is the part where the mainstream media is reporting on it. This is the part where your grandpa and grandma who took the jab are starting to talk about it. This is the part where it's starting to leak into the most insane places. You're going to have people that have never been on board with any of the things that we've been talking about. What are they going to do? Deny these Newsweek articles? And this is just the beginning of this episode, you guys. I got a couple of other things that we need to talk about, and I'm going to leave the jab out of this episode because we'll say literally every single thing we predicted about the jab has turned out to be true. But moving on, I don't want to get lost in it. There's old Peter Daszak. God, he just has one of those faces, doesn't he? Well, it's that kind of adrenochrome, kind of weird-looking kind of face they all have, right? It's the same kind of face, right? I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy. DARPA rejected the proposal. Now, see, that's when you know your proposal is batshit crazy. Pardon the pun. But that's when you know your proposal's batshit crazy is when DARPA's like, no, we're going to go back to manipulating the weather. Listing among its shortcomings the failures to address the risks of gain-of-function research, which Anthony Fauci would tell you, technically we weren't doing gain-of-function research, but DARPA thought they were, and the lack of discussion on the ethical, legal, and social issues, like the possibility of a global pandemic. It was a level-headed assessment. What's remarkable is that much of the same work that crossed a line for the Department of Defense was embraced by the National Institute of Vaccines. I mean the National Institute of Health. The NIH and EcoHealth had asserted that none of the engineered viruses created with the NIH grant could have possibly become the SARS-CoV-2. On that, everyone agrees, except the person reading this article right now. I vehemently disagree with that. There's no proof at all that it could not have come out of that. And I feel like the onus of proof is on them now. You need to prove that it didn't come out of them, because right now they're saying, well, there's no proof that it did. Well, considering we've caught you in about a dozen lies in the past 10 minutes, I think maybe the onus might be on you to prove that it didn't. The viruses are too distantly related, right? Okay. But the detailed recipe in the DARPA application is a blueprint for doing just that with a more closely related virus. In September, scientists from Francis Pasteur's Institute announced the discovery of just such a virus, SARS-CoV-2's closest known relative, in a bat cave in Laos. Okay, but they just said that it was completely a different family. It could never have possibly come from that. It's completely different. And then in the very next sentence, they say, but they did discover such a virus, and it's the closest known relative to SARS-CoV-2. It's bizarre the devils speak in these articles when they're doing this slow drip of disclosure, because they're trying to release a little bit at a time, but they also still have some facades that they need to continue to build up. Now, much later on down the line, they'll readdress this and they'll let people understand, well, yeah, they might have been actually closely related. The discovery was hailed by some scientists as evidence that SARS-CoV-2 must have had a natural origin. But the plot turned in November when another trove of NIH documents released in response to a FOIA request by the White Coast Waste Project brought evidence trail right to EcoHealth's doorstep. In 2017, EcoHealth had informed the NIH that it would be shifting its focus to Laos and other countries in Southwest Asia. Well, what a coinky-dink! EcoHealth told Newsweek that it did not directly undertake or fund any sampling in Laos. Any samples or results from Laos are based on the WIV's work, funded through other mechanisms. Wow. We didn't technically fund that research in Laos, right? So all the research we were funding was up here in Wuhan, and yeah, the research in Laos was funded out of Wuhan, but we didn't fund the research in Laos. We funded the research in Wuhan that funded the research in Laos. Got it? Wow. It's literally unbelievable. You know, this is a good time for me to go ahead and tell you guys what I think might have happened with this. I've gone over it a couple of times on the channel, but since we're getting into it, let's get into it. What I think happened was they discovered one in those bat caves in Wuhan, and, you know, the clique found out about it. You know, the Gates, Fauci clique. And they then sampled the human population. And they found out, well, this SARS virus that we found in this cave is actually already ubiquitous in the human population. Let that marinate for a second. So they never knew how to test for this virus because they never knew the genetic sequencing, right? But it's already been in the human population because it's a cold. So just let that marinate. We've all just called things the cold. We get these respiratory things and these things that come around every winter, blah, blah, blah. A lot of old people die from it. A lot of people who are obese and have multiple comorbidities, they die from this stuff. It's been around for hundreds of years, but we didn't know the sequence. We didn't know how to test for it. So we always just called it a cold and we left it general. Well, they pull this virus out of this cave, and then they test a sample in the human population and they find out, holy crap, it's already in the human population. Well, at that point, they've got a couple of options. What can they do? Well, they could announce it. We've discovered this virus and it's already infected millions and millions of humans. We've probably been fighting this virus since the beginning of time. And now we're going to try to invent vaccines and therapeutics, and we're going to try to fight it. They could have done that. That's what normal people would have done. Or they could have low-key, quietly invented a bunch of tests to test for said virus, invented therapeutics and vaccines for said virus, and yet told nobody that they found the sequence, told nobody that they knew how to test it, told nobody that it was already ubiquitous in the human population. And then you would literally be able to manufacture a pandemic, because all you have to do is hand out the tests. And as people start getting testing positive for it, because it's already ubiquitous, it's been around for years and years and years, but we didn't know how to test for it. As the more and more people get tested, more and more cases show up, and then all of a sudden, boom, it looks like we have a pandemic. When in reality, all that happened was they discovered a SARS virus in a bat cave that was already endemic in the human population, something known as the, quote, common cold. Just let that theory marinate for a little while. Let me know what you think about it in the comments section. Regardless of who paid for the collecting portion of the project, it's clear that for years a large number of bat samples from the region that harbors viruses similar to SARS-CoV-2 were sent to the WIV. In other words, EcoHealth's team was in the right place at the right time to have found things very close to SARS-CoV-2 and to have sent them to Wuhan. Okay. Because there's a lag of several years between when samples are collected and when experiments involving those viruses are published, the most recent papers from EcoHealth and WIV date to 2015. The identity of the viruses found between 2016 and 2019 are known only to the two organizations, neither of which has been willing to share that information with the world. Do you understand what I'm saying? Do you understand how you could find out that there was a virus that everyone in the world already had? You could create tests for that said virus, and then you can manufacture a pandemic using the releasing of those tests. Do you understand what I'm saying? I bet you do, because you're here. A lack of evidence proves nothing, but neither does it put EcoHealth's or the WIV's action in the early days of the pandemic in a good light. Why choose not to share valuable information on SARS-like coronaviruses with the world? I wonder why. Why not explain your projects and proposals and give scientists access to the unpublished virus sequences in your database? I wonder why. For whatever reason, they chose crisis management mode instead. The WIV went into lockdown. Databases were taken offline. Daszak launched his preemptive campaign to prevent anyone from looking behind the curtain, and EcoHealth and NIH tried hard to keep the details of their collaboration private. I wonder why they couldn't release the databases of all the coronaviruses that they found in that bat cave in Wuhan. Congressional inquiries focusing on Dr. Fauci and the NIH's decisions to fund unnecessarily risky research by a lab in Wuhan are probably forthcoming. If, as appears increasingly likely, Republicans take control of the Congress after the 2020 midterms, which I wouldn't be so certain because the election situation has not been addressed. We'll just leave it at that. Not allowed to talk about it any further. While it's important to understand how the NIH came to use such poor judgment in its dealings with EcoHealth Alliance, that won't tell us much about the WIV's research in the months leading up to the pandemic, especially since China is not likely to open its books. Answers are more likely to lie in the records of EcoHealth Alliance. Oh God. I mean, do people read that and really believe that those records have not been scrubbed from reality? I mean, I guess there are people out there who believe that. It's the people who are first now learning about everything this news article says when they read this news article. And so that's the article that I will call the EcoHealth Alliance Chimeric SARS-CoV-2 Soft Disclosure article in Newsweek this week. Now, there's a couple of other things I wanted to go over. I told you I'm not touching on the jab today, and I'm not going to. But there are some things I want to talk about. And funny enough, they revolve around somebody that we already know well. Do you guys remember Dr. Leana Wen? I made this episode, What Will Be the Carrot? Because she was saying we need to make it clear to the unvaccinated population that the only way for you to get back to normal life is to take the poke. Remember that? I think I might have accidentally accused her of being a communist spy, which, I mean, I don't take back, but I'm just saying I did that. Well, she's been on CNN again, and yet this time she's got some very interesting things to say about masks. Now, remember, this episode's all about the slow drip of soft disclosure, the way that they kind of release the actual truth to us. And they do it in a way where they, like people like myself, we can never be labeled as correct or, oh, you were right, because they just slow drip it and everybody's just like a frog in boiling water, right? They get warmed up to the idea of what we were saying originally. Way's talking about masks. And boy, she has some interesting things to say on the talk show circuit, on the talk show circuit about masks this past week.
Mayor de Blasio says that the city has not yet made a decision on if it will cancel the Times Square event for crowds to show up. Right now, you have to be vaccinated, show proof of vaccination if they hold it. But for people who are...
First of all, can we just take a time out and take a second to appreciate that they can cancel going to Times Square? I thought that was public property. Like, you can cancel the city? I didn't know that. Yeah. And that's actually, as a matter of fact, you're not allowed to walk the streets, evidently, on New Year's Eve unless you've been jabbed and you can show proof. Isn't that amazing? That's where we're at, folks. That's where we are. But let's hear what Dr. Wen has to say about that.
Considering going there or to the Peach Drop in Atlanta or any of these similar events across the country, what would your advice to them be? Go, not go, or if you're vaccinated, you're fine? What do you think?
Well, I do not think that Mayor de Blasio should be canceling the New York City event because it requires proof of vaccination and it's outdoors. We should be keeping the...
Oh, it's outdoors. You remember back when we tried to say that it was okay to be outdoors? You remember that? Got some videos removed over that one too. Interesting.
that are safe and also the events that have fun for people too. We can't be canceling everything, especially if we're going to be living with COVID for the foreseeable future.
Whoa! We're going to be living with COVID for the foreseeable future. That almost sounds like it's going to be endemic. It almost sounds like she's saying it's like the flu or, I don't know, a cold? Wow. So we're going to be living with the CV for the foreseeable future. That's wild. So lockdowns, etc., no, we need to be having fun. Of course, the people who've taken the poke, but wow, what a change. So we're going to be living with the CV for the foreseeable future. You guys remember when we were talking about that, 2 years ago? Everybody's going to get it. It's going to be around. Endemic. Remember that? Man, I got banned. I got the crap banned out of me for all that.
I would say that if you choose to go, make sure that you're vaccinated and boosted. Make sure that you're wearing a...
Oh, vaccinated and boosted. Well, I don't want to talk about the jab. I said I wasn't going to, but we'll mention it briefly. If you don't have your booster in the next few weeks, guess what, y'all? You're going to be in the same group as me. So if you guys hate those unvaccinated people, you better go get your booster because you're going to be one in another couple weeks.
A mask, even though it's outdoors, if there are lots of people packed around you wearing a 3-ply surgical mask, don't wear a cloth mask. Cloth masks are little more than facial decorations.
Let's listen to that again.
People packed around you wearing a 3-ply surgical mask, don't wear a cloth mask. Cloth masks are little more than facial decorations. Don't wear a cloth mask. Cloth masks are little more than facial decorations. There's no place for them in light of Omicron. And so wear a high...
Wow. In light of Omicron, she says, right? She said in light of Omicron, right?
There's no place for them in light of Omicron.
In light of Omicron. Okay. So in this clip, she's saying because of Omicron, right? The cloth masks are a waste of time, no more than facial decorations, which is funny because I'm pretty sure I was calling them face rags a couple years ago. I meant the same thing. It's a facial decoration. But isn't that interesting, right? But she's saying in light of this new variant, Omicron, cloth masks are now all of a sudden useless.
And so wear a high-quality mask, at least a 3-ply surgical mask. And if you're going to be visiting elderly relatives or immunocompromised people after, wait 3 days, get tested, and then see those vulnerable people.
No, because the test is so accurate. Don't get me on a sidetrack. Let's just move on. Remember, she said light of Omicron. So when she said that, I was like, wow. So Dr. Wei's on CNN saying that masks are useless because, I don't know, like we've been talking for 2 years, the CV is airborne and blah, 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 blah. I don't need to go through it with you guys. You already know. But isn't that interesting? She's saying it on CV, but of course she's using Omicron as an excuse. But then I found this clip, and in this clip, she completely negates what she said in the previous one. It's not just in light of Omicron. She says they were never viable.
Cloth masks are not appropriate for this pandemic. It's not appropriate for Omicron. It was not appropriate for Delta, Alpha, or any of the previous variants either, because we're dealing with something that's airborne.
Isn't it crazy? It takes 2 years to get the woman to say it on CNN so that I can talk about it officially on YouTube and not be banned. And now I'm not saying I'm not going to be banned because I could 100% be banned for this episode. I'm kind of riding the line here. But let's just listen to that again and take it all in, right?
Cloth masks are not appropriate for this pandemic. It's not appropriate for Omicron. It was not appropriate for Delta, Alpha, or any of the previous variants either, because we're dealing with something that's airborne.
Yeah, guys. It's just hilarious to me how she just says it so nonchalantly, like that's always been her opinion. And now I've got one more situation I want to talk. So we have addressed the gain of function research in Wuhan. We've addressed the uselessness of masks. And now I want to address testing. Now the CDC director was on Good Morning America talking about the new rules that they have regarding testing and isolation. You know, because The left stream media is losing their minds over the fact that they've shortened the amount of days that you have to isolate to 5 days. Now, there's a whole lot of reasons behind that. And in coming episodes, we're going to talk about the fallacy of the asymptomatic spreader, something that was a cornerstone of the panic they induced in 2020, and about how it's complete bullshit. But we're not doing that today. Today, we're just going to let the CDC director speak for herself, and the only thing we're going to talk about briefly is the testing.
So speaking of testing, those new CDC guidelines announced this week reducing the isolation period from 10 to 5 days. Many are applauding the move, but you're also facing some criticism for not including a test out policy. Former Surgeon General Jerome Adams said that this is not about the best science. It's more of a compromise to keep the economy open. Why didn't you include a testing component?
So first, let me sort of back up and say, we had a lot of science to inform our decisions, and it was science in many different areas. The first was, how does the virus work? How is viral decay happening? And we do know that the vast majority of viral transmission happens in those first 5 days, somewhere in the 85 to 90% range. So we're really talking, if you can isolate for those first 5 days, that would be great. We also know epidemiologically that we anticipate a lot of cases. We've seen in other countries that up to 4 or 5% of people may have infection. And so we really do need to prepare for what happens, especially if those people are asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic, and they really are ready to go out and about. And then, of course, third is behavior. We've seen in some studies that up to only a third of people actually isolate when we ask them to. So with all of that science together, we moved forward with isolation recommendations of 5 days of isolation followed by 5 days in a mask.
So now we've moved from 2 weeks, right? And now they're coming around, right, to what we've been saying from the beginning, that it's something you're going to get sick from for a week. When you're sick, you can spread it, stay at home, wash your hands. We're coming around to that. Now, remember when this all started, it was 2 weeks and you could be completely asymptomatic and be spreading it to everyone for weeks. For weeks. Years later, here we are, and the CDC is now slow dripping that disclosure. They're letting everyone know, 5 days, good enough. We know you guys aren't going to really isolate anyway, so, just, do the best you can, guys.
Now, the question of why we didn't include a test there is simply because we know that PCRs can stay positive for up to 12 weeks. So we would have people in isolation for a very long time if we were relying on PCRs.
We have seen those. That's if you can get a test. We've seen those long lines, people standing out in the...
We know that...
What did she just say? Right? What did she just say? It's almost unbelievable. Right? It's almost unbelievable.
We know that PCRs can stay positive for up to 12 weeks.
PCRs can stay positive for up to 12 weeks. What? Yes. PCRs can stay positive for up to 12 weeks. So, if you know any of those people, and y'all know those people, we all know those people. The people who were the first ones to get it and declare it, and then they got it again, and it spread to all their family, and they know several people who have died from it. It's very serious. Take it serious. The PCR test will pop hot for 12 weeks after infection. We are going to get into the details about this in coming episodes, but we have already gone through it. If you'll remember, I made an episode called Cycle Threshold, the omitted statistic that ruined the PCR test and altered history. I streamed that episode 10 months ago because I had done those episodes on Kary Mullis, Dr. Kary Mullis, the person who invented the PCR test, and how he had talked about cycle threshold and how after 25 cycles, you could literally find anything you went looking for. And how many cycles do the PCR test do for the CV? When it started out, it was 45. Now it's 35. And what did Kary Mullis say? You can find anything if you go over 25. It's an unreliable test. And here you have the CDC saying, well, you get the CV, you'll still test positive for 12 weeks later. In the same breath that she's saying you only need to isolate for 5 days. So if you catch it, you only need to isolate for 5 days. But your PCR test will test positive for 12 weeks. And they want to use numbers? They want to use statistics? They want to talk about how many people have it and have had it again? They want to use this test as something reliable? This is literally clown world. Literally.
Now, the question of why we didn't include a test there is simply because we know that PCRs can stay positive for up to 12 weeks. So we would have people in isolation for a very long time if we were relying on PCRs.
We have seen
Or why don't we say we have had people in isolation for a very long time if we relied on PCRs? Are you telling me we can't rely on PCRs? Haven't we been relying on PCRs this whole time? Especially for the whole fallacy of the asymptomatic spreader. The only way we knew they were asymptomatic spreading is with the PCR test. And here she says, what about relying?
Is simply because we know that PCRs can stay positive for up to 12 weeks. So we would have people in isolation for a very long time if we were relying on PCRs.
If we were relying on PCRs, I don't know when the CDC stopped relying on PCR tests, guys. You're going to have to ask them yourselves. As far as I knew, that's the one thing we were using. But they just changed things up. Soft disclosure.
To test there is simply because we know that PCRs can stay positive for up to 12 weeks. So we would have people in isolation for a very long time if we were relying on PCRs.
We have seen those. That's if you can get a test. We've seen those long lines people stand.
That's if you can get a test. Let me ask you a question, Tommy. Why is it that people are waiting in line for a test that she just said was inaccurate?
Out in the cold once again. But did the decision have anything to do with the government's ability to actually meet the demand for testing?
So listen to what he's asking. He's asking, did you guys say that there's not going to be a testing requirement to let people out of isolation because you didn't have enough tests? Now, that should be an asinine question, right? Never would you do that. You need to test people if they're still sick. You need to know that they're better before they go out. You would never make that decision based off of a financial thing unless you remember Anthony Fauci lying to everybody about don't go out and buy a mask. You remember that? So it's actually a valid question. Like, are you lying to the American people about these tests just because you don't have enough? We live in a world where that's a valid question. That's insane.
We have seen those. That's if you can get a test. We've seen those long lines, people standing out in the cold once again. But did the decision have anything to do with the government's ability to actually meet the demand for testing?
So in our isolation recommendations, we did not recommend a test because we did not know what we would do with the information, and it would not inform any further decision making. But
she said if we gave them tests, it wouldn't help. Well, Bobby, if we gave them tests, we didn't know what we would do with that information because it's completely inaccurate.
We did not recommend a test because we did not know what we would do with the information, and it would not inform any further decision making. But in our quarantine recommendations, our recommendations for what you do if you are exposed to the virus, in all of those recommendations, we clearly say that a best practice would be to get a test at 5 days after exposure. So no, it did not.
And what about kids? It wasn't specifically spelled out in the guidance. If they get the virus or are exposed to COVID, what do they do? And how should schools respond to this?
So our recommendations are true for both adults and for children. So
they're not making any distinction between children and adults in their recommendations. And again, we're not going to get into the minutia here, but just the idea that that, it shows you how asinine this entire situation is. When you look at an age group of 10 to 20-year-olds and the amount that the numbers say those people are affected, and then you compare that to a group of 60 to 70-year-olds and the numbers that they say are effective, and then you and then you realize that they're creating a policy that includes both of those groups and lumps them together. It's insane, you guys. This is we've really lost it. It's really madness out there. Mad. It's madness.
have really clear science now on a test to stay strategy, that if children are exposed, they can safely return to school as long as they're getting a test every day, every other day.
Every day. Every other day. The science is clear. These kids can go back to school as long as they're getting a Q-tip jammed up their nose every day or every other day. A test that I just told you was inaccurate and that I just told you would not serve any statistical benefit 5 days after infection. That test. Kids can go back to school as long as they're taking that test every day or every other day. It's amazing. It's honestly amazing.
The third day, and we've demonstrated over the last month new science that demonstrates that's a very safe way to keep our children in school, and that's really our goal. Of course, the most important thing we can do to keep our children safe is to get them vaccinated.
Oh, of course it is. Of course it is. God help us, you guys. God help us. But anyways, I had a fun time making this episode. It's really good to be back on the mic, to be honest with you. I love you guys. I appreciate y'all liking and commenting on my shorts as I was just trying to keep the channel up to date and trying to keep you guys with me during a time period where I was going through my own issues and having my own struggles. I can't stand when YouTubers get on the mic and start complaining about life, so I'm not going to do that. But I just want to let you guys know that you all mean the world to me, especially my subscribers that have been here from the rip. You guys are the best, and I appreciate you and your comments. You guys are some of the smartest people I know on the interwebs, and you remain that way to this day. I look forward to making more content coming. I showed you guys in my community post that I got a new camera, so I'm going to be doing some live streaming as soon as I get an HDMI cable to hook it up to my laptop and get this thing going. So we got a lot of new stuff coming in the future. I'm excited. Still demonetized on YouTube, so I would appreciate it if you guys would go to Odyssey and Rumble, subscribe to me there. All the ways to donate to the channel are in the pinned comment below. I would also appreciate any kind of help you guys could give me in that way, because that really helps me to invest more money into this so that I can grow the channel and I can expand it. Because as of right now, you guys, I gotta tell you, I've put a couple of grand into this channel and I've not made anywhere near that making content. So I'm doing this because I love it. And I'm doing it because it's important, and I feel like this information needs to get out to people, and I feel like the world's kind of gone mad, and there might need to be some comedic relief so that we can all just get together and laugh about how crazy this is, but at the same time share important information so that we can all be informed and make better decisions. But anyways, guys, I love you all. Happy New Year. I hope that we have a better 2022 than we had a 2021. I certainly think that that's possible. When you've hit rock bottom, there's nowhere to go but up, and I feel like last year was pretty bad. Anyways, y'all, I love you. Talk to you soon. Peace.